Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon spoilers video. So we're finally getting to know a lot more cards that are going to be coming out in BT06, and a lot of these cards are looking to be really exciting and really interesting. So let's just go over the ones that we got shown. First up, we have Eosmon. So Eosmon is looking to be a pretty unique Digimon considering we don't have a whole lot of low-level white Digimon, and this is a white level 4 Digimon, but it could also Digivolve off of a green level 3, so this kind of leads me to believe that Morphomon is going to be that green level 3 Digimon, which kind of only makes sense, but regardless, Eosmon is definitely looking to be a pretty decent Digimon just because she has two big abilities. So her first ability is an on-play ability where you get to play one 4-cost or below white tamer from your hand for free, and then your opponent may play a tamer card from their hand for free as well. So I'm not super thrilled on the fact that she's allowing the opponent to play their tamers, but if the opponent doesn't have a tamer to play, then I guess the ability's kind of okay. That's just kind of the risk you take, but the fact that we have an easy way to play our white tamers is definitely really interesting because, as we saw with BT05, there's some really decent white tamer cards that you definitely would consider wanting to play. But regardless, that ability just to be able to play your tamers more efficiently is always really nice and definitely something to think about. And then on top of that, she also has a really good inheritable skill where it's a when attacking ability. You get to play a white 4-cost or below tamer card from your hand for free. So most of the time, you're probably just going to want to forget the top part of the ability just because the chance of letting the opponent play their tamers could be really detrimental. But her inheritable ability, being able to just allow you to do the same thing just on attack, is definitely something you really want out of the card, just because, again, the hardest part to playing tamers is sometimes figuring out when to play the tamer, or if the board state even allows you to play a tamer, and this just allows you to just easily get your tamers out more efficiently, which is just really, really good. But this card also might be alluding that we might see more white tamers in the set, so that's always something interesting to look out for. Next, we have another version of Eosmon. So this is Eosmon level 5, and this Eosmon is definitely a pretty unique Digimon. So what this Digimon is doing is, first, it's a white level 5 Digimon, so we don't really have a whole lot of white low-level Digimon in the game, and it can Digivolve off of a white level 4 or a green level 4, so it might be playing around with some interesting green Digimon there, but obviously the intended support is supposed to be for the other Eosmon that we just saw before. But as far as what the card is doing ability-wise, its first ability is probably its most unique ability. So its first ability is you could have up to 50 of this card in your deck, which is really interesting to think about just because we haven't really had this type of ability before, and when other card games do it, it usually leads to some really interesting results. So I'm excited to see how people utilize that ability to just be able to play more than 4 copies of this card in their deck. But outside of that, it has a really good when attacking ability where you get to play one level 5 or below Eosmon from your hand for free. So this is kind of like ties into its first ability where obviously you're going to want to have more than just 4 copies in your deck. So that way when you swing, you'll be able to play more Eosmon. So there's that intended synergy there. And then on top of all of that, it even has a really nice inheritable skill where during your turn, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So its inheritable skill is a little bit lackluster, but it's probably meant for the level 6 Eosmon, and the level 6 Eosmon is probably going to be playing around with the level 4 and level 5 Eosmon, so we'll just have to wait to see what the level 6 holds to see how good the rest of these cards shape up to be and what kind of deck they form. Next up, we have Agumon, Bond of Courage. So this is basically the Kizuna Agumon that was shown in the last Evolution movie, and it's definitely a really powerful Digimon to be playing around with. So stat-wise, he is a red level 7 that evos for 3 and has 14,000 DP, so he's not too shabby on the stat front, he's looking pretty decent, and then on top of which, he has 2 really powerful abilities. His first ability is a when attacking ability, where if you have a tamer in play, then you get to destroy one of the opponent's Digimon that has 13,000 DP or below. So this is just a really strong removal effect, and this kind of reminds me of Omnimon X Antibody, where the whole point of the card is you're just going to start swinging and deleting the opponent's Digimon, and that's just, again, really powerful to be playing around with, especially since he has a really low Evo cost of 3, so that way you could easily and efficiently get up into him and start swinging with him right away to start decimating the opponent's board. And then his second ability pairs up very nicely with his first ability, where his second ability is a your turn ability once per turn. When your opponent's Digimon is deleted, then you get to trash out one of their security. So this is also kind of acting like the Gabumon all the way back in BT02, where he has the ability to just trash the opponent's security and perform security checks also, and this kind of feels like it's doing a very similar thing. So I definitely really like the fact that we have more abilities to just trash the opponent's security, and this just seems like a really good card to be playing around with overall. Next up, we have a new Agumon. So Agumon over here is looking to be pretty decent considering he has a really strong ability where during both players' turns, once per turn, when you have a tamer with Tai in its name get played, then you get to gain 1 memory. So this is really nice because obviously we're going to be playing some ties because the whole intended synergy is Agumon, Tai, and Bond of Courage. So that's going to be like the whole intended purpose, and we already have a whole bunch of other ties in the game that this card could be interacting with. But the fact that if a tie does come out of the security and you do have the Agumon on field, then you get to gain 1 memory for that ability. Or if you just need to play your ties, then this just makes playing your tamers that much more efficient, which is always really, really nice. And then on top of that first ability, his second ability is also pretty decent, where it's an inheritable during your turn. If this Digimon is Agumon Bond of Courage, then this Digimon gets security attack +1. So obviously you really want to have your Agumon in the evolution sources of your Bond of Courage, which just makes Bond of Courage even stronger, especially if you fully stack him. Then he could hit for basically a whole bunch of security and be like a real big one punch, where he's just going to attack, delete something, remove the opponent's security off, and then you could just pair him up with a whole bunch of security attacks just to deal a whole bunch of damage. Or his intended synergy is to be used with the new Tai, which I'll get to in just a minute, to basically just warp Digivolve from your level 3 all the way up into your level 7. So that's just a really powerful synergy to think about, and it's definitely looking to be a pretty decent card to be played in that new Agumon Bond of Courage deck that wants to be forming. But the next card, as I mentioned before, we have a new Tai. So this new Tai is looking to be a pretty decent tamer considering he has some really unique abilities. So his first ability is during your turn. When your Digimon with Agumon or Greymon in its name is moved from the raising area to the battle area, then you get to gain a memory and draw 1 card. So this is just really unique because we don't really have a whole lot of interactions with the raising area, and while this isn't directly interacting with the raising area itself, it's kind of just referencing the raising area and the fact that you want to be building the deck in a particular way, and he's going to be rewarding you by allowing you to draw a card and gain a memory. So that's just really powerful just because the more you move out of your raising area, the more value you'll get off of this Tai, and that's just a pretty decent to think about considering Red isn't necessarily known for having good card draw or memory management, so it's definitely nice to see that this card is doing both of those things and is interacting with a lot of Agumons and Greymons, which, again, if you're going to be building the deck around it, then that's the majority of what you're going to be running. So trying to set up this ability as early as possible is probably going to be for the better in the long run. And then on top of that, what you're really playing this card for is his other ability, where it's a main ability once per turn. You can evolve one of your Agumon into Agumon Bond of Courage from your hand by paying its evolution cost and ignoring its level requirement. And then if you do, you have to discard 2 of your security. Then if you have 1 or more security at the end of the turn, destroy that Digimon. So while it is unfortunate that you do lose the Digimon if you have any security at all, and when you do utilize this ability to warp Digivolve, you will be losing some security, but if you don't have any security to lose, then the ability doesn't really matter, and you get to keep the Digimon on the field. So this is a really good kind of comeback mechanic in a way, where if you're just caught in a losing position, then you just have an Agumon in raising. You could just go straight up into your Bond of Courage and try to close out the game with Bond of Courage. So I really like the whole interaction that all of these cards have and the interactions that all of these cards have with a lot of the previous cards, and you could really make some crazy unique decks based off of these new cards because there's just so much you could do based on the name-based synergies that we currently already have. And similar to Agumon Bond of Courage, we also got shown Gabumon Bond of Friendship. So stat-wise, they're doing basically the exact same thing, except this one's in blue. And ability-wise, they're doing some relatively similar things, where this has a really decent when attacking ability once per turn. If we have a Tamer in play, then we get to make this Digimon active. So that's just your very stereotypical blue thing, where one of the big aspects to blue is just multi-attacking. So you could utilize this card to line up a whole bunch of additional attacks to try to close out the game that way. So it's still trying to deal a whole bunch of damage at the same time, similar to how Bond of Courage is trying to do it in Red's classic way. And then on top of that ability, he also has his own removal ability, where when attacking, we get to return one of the opponent's level 5 or below Digimon to the bottom of their deck, and then all of their evolution sources are discarded. So even though the removal ability isn't necessarily as generically decent as the Agumons, it's still a pretty decent removal ability considering it's not bouncing, it's putting it to the bottom of the deck, and you could target multiple Digimon just because he could get multiple attacks off. So there's pros and cons to both, and even though this removal ability does feel a little bit weaker, considering this can't hit level 6s, and technically Agumons can hit all the way up to level 6, and even some level 7s, it's still definitely a really good ability to be having on the card nonetheless, just because, again, blue doesn't really have good removal. And then we got shown a new Mat and a new Gabumon that are basically doing the exact same thing as the Tai and his Agumon, except obviously there's going to be the difference just because of the slightly different synergies. So what the Gabumon is doing is the same thing as Agumon, where when a Mat is played, then you get to gain 1 memory on both players' turns. So there's that similar ability there. And then on top of which, he has another good inheritable ability, where when attacking, if this Digimon is Gabumon Bond of Friendship, then we get to make this Digimon active. So basically, this Gabumon is just adding an extra attack onto Bond of Friendship, which is pretty good because it allows him to swing even more times to try to close out the game even faster, which again all ties into the comeback mechanic that kind of the Tamer is playing around with, because the Tamer basically is doing the exact same abilities as the Tai that we saw before, except this is interacting with Gabumon and Gabumon Bond of Friendship and garurumons. So these are definitely looking like very powerful cards, and there's just a whole bunch of deck building possibilities that these cards can bring, just because, again, they're interacting with name-based synergies, and there's some really cheeky lines of play that you could utilize a whole bunch of other cards to make the most out of these cards with. So I'm definitely really excited to see where the set is leading, considering every time new cards are added to the card pool, it definitely will always spice up the game and to create a whole bunch of new possibilities that weren't before. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.